The final week at the Abbey of the Holy Sacrament had arrived. The Mother Superior had prepared parting gifts for her graduates, miniature Bibles and delicate shawls embroidered by the nuns. Though these shawls were usually sold to support the Abbey, this time they would be given as keepsakes in memory of the 3 years the girls had spent under its care. Everyone was filled with joyful anticipation. Soon they would return to their family homes. Some had even already been promised to respectable suitors. Only Constance, a tall, thin girl with a perpetually melancholy expression, watched the others with quiet envy. No one was waiting for her. She was a foundling. As she dimly remembered, and as the sisters had often told her, a noblewoman hidden beneath a heavy veil had once arrived at the Abbey gates in a black carriage and entrusted the child to the Mother Superior. Since that day, Constance had known no home but the Abbey. She could imagine no future for herself except devoting her life to the convent and living forever as an outcast from society. The other girls rarely sought her company. More often they avoided her. To their credit, however, they never mocked the orphan. Everyone understood what she likely was, the illegitimate and helpless consequence of a secret affair or forbidden passion. Such matters were never spoken of openly. Constance had only one true friend, the only person she never feared approaching. Her name was Elvira de Morois. The two girls even shared the same cell. Elvira was somewhat proud and haughty, yet she possessed an unshakable sense of justice and never hesitated to defend what she believed was right. The other girls were often intimidated by her confidence, but they frequently sought her advice. Even the nuns could not explain where Elvira had acquired such wisdom at so young an age. They simply attributed it to the distinguished bloodline of House de Morois. Elvira's grandfather had been a court poet during the reign of King Philip. Her uncle was renowned for portraits so lifelike that people claimed they might begin speaking at any moment. As for the celebrated knights of her lineage, their feats and conquests had long become legend. Elvira herself was tall and graceful, though her manner resembled that of an Amazon more than a proper young lady. Many envied her sharp mind and insatiable curiosity. Philosophy and history came to her with remarkable ease. She spoke of long-forgotten events as though she had witnessed them herself, recalling names and dates with uncanny precision. Whenever those subjects appeared on the schedule, the other students could relax. Elvira would eagerly take over the lesson, often telling more than the teachers themselves knew. And so it happened that this slender, self-assured, proud young woman had taken lonely Constance under her protection. Shortly before graduation, Elvira wrote to her father asking him to prepare a room for Constance as well, for she intended her friend to live at the family estate as her companion. Without even waiting for a reply, Elvira announced her decision to everyone and instructed Constance to begin packing for the journey. No one doubted that events would unfold exactly as Elvira intended. Her father was a widower who adored his only daughter. Constance attempted to protest, but it was hopeless. Elvira merely raised an eyebrow as she surveyed her friend's pitiful belongings and decided that suitable dresses could be found for her later at the estate. That settled the matter. Truth be told, the Mother Superior disliked the arrogant Elvira and was secretly delighted to see her leave. The girl's keen intelligence and piercing observations had an unfortunate habit of exposing things the teachers preferred to ignore. Yet Elvira herself had grown tired of the Abbey's confinement. She longed for freedom. She longed for home. She longed to mount a spirited horse and race across open fields, to shoot pigeons with a bow as she had done in childhood, and then roast them over a fire with the gamekeeper. Only a few days separated her from all of that. She began marking them on the wall beside her bed with chalk. The closer her liberation approached, the happier she became, and the more frightened Constance grew of the uncertain future awaiting her. When the earthenware jug of ale landed heavily on the table, releasing its rich, yeasty aroma, Elvira inhaled deeply with delight and eagerly lifted her mug to her lips. Constance swallowed nervously, hesitated for a moment, and finally decided to try it as well. After eating and drinking their fill, the girls resumed their journey. They were expected to travel until the following morning, provided nothing unexpected happened along the way. Soon they left the city behind. Vast meadows appeared on either side of the road, glowing yellow with thousands of dandelions. Elvira let out a cry of joy. "Stop the carriage!" Before anyone could answer, she jumped onto the road, kicked off her shoes, and ran into the field. Laughing, she threw herself into the fragrant sea of flowers and stretched her arms wide. "My little sons," she exclaimed, smiling at the blossoms and burying her face in their velvet petals. The flowers answered her affection by dusting her cheeks with golden pollen. Constance approached more slowly, watching the playful scene without daring to join in. "Take off your shoes," Elvira ordered, patting the grass beside her, "and lie down." When Constance finally allowed herself to relax, her entire face transformed. A rosy color returned to her cheeks, and a sparkle appeared in her eyes. For the first time, she began to understand what she would have sacrificed had she condemned herself to a lifetime behind gray monastery walls. The rest of the day passed without incident. Several times they stopped to buy trinkets or enjoy refreshments at roadside stalls. By evening, darkness began creeping across the countryside, and a decision had to be made: stop for the night or risk traveling through the forest after sunset. The coachman suggested turning westward. "There is a small inn nearby," he explained. "They have rooms and hot food." But Elvira's youthful recklessness awakened. "We continue," she declared. "Nothing frightens us." The coachman merely shrugged. There was little one could do against the wishes of noble passengers. The footman grimaced as he glanced uneasily toward the darkening woods. "One can stumble upon bandits even in daylight," he muttered. "What devil possesses her to travel at night?" "Perhaps fortune will protect us," the coachman said, crossing himself before flicking the reins. The horses moved forward. Constance nervously twisted her handkerchief in her fingers, irritating Elvira more with each passing minute. At last she snapped. "Enough! You behave as though we're marching into battle. The sooner we reach home, the sooner we can rest properly." "But I'm frightened," Constance stammered. "What if someone is waiting for us in the forest?" Elvira laughed. "Do you think bandits are fools who never sleep? They're people too. You've filled your head with ridiculous stories. Calm yourself. I'm here." Yet Constance's trembling only grew worse. Unable to endure it any longer, Elvira moved to the opposite seat. Suddenly, the horses whinnied in terror. The carriage lurched violently. The girls were thrown against one another. "What's happening?" Elvira shouted, leaning toward the window. A pale and frightened face appeared outside, the footman. Then another face emerged beside his, a stranger. His eyes gleamed in the darkness, and a black bandage crossed the bridge of his nose. "Esteemed ladies," he announced in a dry, mocking voice, "you have arrived. I'm afraid you'll have to step outside." Elvira felt Constance's fingers seize her wrist in panic. Her nails dug painfully into her skin. Blood rushed to Elvira's temples. A sly smile slowly spread across her face. "Oh, really?" she said. She roughly pushed Constance aside and flung open the carriage door. On the edge of the seat lay a smooth, round black stone. Elvira had picked it up somewhere along the road earlier because it had shimmered brilliantly in the sunlight. Now, acting purely on instinct, her hand closed around it tightly. The bandit shoved the footman aside. Seeing only a young girl before him, he stepped forward boldly and bowed with mocking courtesy. "Welcome, my lady, to my kingdom, but I must warn you, entry is not free." Elvira stepped toward him as well. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed there were only two of them. The second man stood beside the coachman, holding the horses by their bridles. "And I greet you, prince of this forest," she replied with a smirk and a graceful curtsy. "May I know your name?" The robber, amused that she had joined his game, laughed. "I prefer to remain unknown, but I shall still collect my toll." And how much does admission to this kingdom cost?" she asked, spreading one free hand. The man planted his fists on his hips and extended a hand toward her. "Everything you have. Gold, jewelry." "Is that all?" Elvira laughed. "I can offer more." More? He repeated, confused, stepping closer. At that very moment, she swung the hand clutching the stone and struck him with all her strength against the temple. The bandit did not even have time to cry out. He staggered, his vision blurred. Then he collapsed heavily to the ground. His companion did not immediately understand what had happened. While he hesitated, the coachman seized him from behind, twisted his arms, and slammed him face first into the dirt. "Quickly!" Elvira shouted. "They may have friends nearby." The coachman nodded and brought a heavy branch down on the second robber's head. He too fell unconscious. The carriage was turned around at once and headed toward the inn. Constance sat trembling, tears running down her cheeks. Why did we have to take such a risk? The coachman warned us. Elvira bit her lip. She hated admitting it, but everyone had been right. She said nothing. Instead, she quietly made a note to herself. When someone warns you of danger, listen and take cover. Perhaps that is God's voice speaking through them. When they arrived at the inn, they told the innkeeper everything that had happened. The man immediately sent several armed villagers to the scene. Before long, they returned, dragging the bound robbers behind them. One of them had a bloody wound on his temple where the stone had struck him. The other sported a black eye and hurled curses at everyone within earshot. The bandits were locked inside a shed and promised a proper delivery to the authorities in the morning. The girls were shown to a room in the attic. Elvira picked at a piece of roasted chicken breast while lost in thought. Constance refused food altogether, still trying to calm herself enough to sleep. Outside, dogs barked loudly in the yard. Men's voices carried through the night air. The coachman was enthusiastically recounting how the young lady had felled a highwayman with a single blow. "You'd never guess it by looking at her," the innkeeper remarked in astonishment. Another voice chuckled. "Perhaps she ought to be the one leading a forest gang." Laughter followed. The voices gradually blended with the barking dogs and the sounds of the night. Exhausted by the long journey and the evening's adventure, the girls finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. By morning, their appetites had returned. They enjoyed a hearty breakfast of cultured milk and spinach pie, thanked their hosts for their kindness and hospitality, and set off once more. The road through the forest where they had been attacked was crowded with curious onlookers, and the carriage was delayed for some time before it could pass. In daylight, the wood seemed far less threatening. Sparrows chirped cheerfully among the branches. White and pale green butterflies drifted down onto the tiny blue wildflowers growing along the roadside. The air was fragrant with moss and pine. "Well, there you have it. The worst is behind us," Elvira remarked without looking at her friend. Constance was still twisting her handkerchief nervously in her hands. By noon, they reached familiar territory, and an hour later, the great oak groves of their childhood came into view. "We're home." The manor house had recently been renovated and seemed to gleam in anticipation of its young mistress's return. Everyone nearby rushed out in a crowd to greet Elvira. She leaped from the carriage and immediately began embracing and kissing friends, servants, and villagers alike. As a child, her father had never discouraged her from mixing freely with the household staff, and so she had grown up without much concern for social distinctions. She proudly introduced Constance, her friend from the abbey, and asked everyone to treat her with the same affection and protection they showed her. After all the greetings and excitement, the master of the estate finally appeared in the doorway. Count Antoine de Morois was a broad-shouldered man with graying sideburns and a proud, commanding posture. "Father!" Elvira cried joyfully and threw her arms around his neck. Only then did a warm paternal smile soften his usually stern, stone-like features. Constance was shown to a comfortable room in the far wing of the house, where the guest chambers were located. Elvira inspected everything personally, making certain it had been arranged exactly as she had imagined. Once satisfied that her friend lacked for nothing, she left her to rest before dinner and hurried off to explore the house herself. For 3 years she had dreamed of these familiar halls. Now she wandered through every room and corridor, rediscovering the corners she had missed during her confinement at the abbey. Remembering her fondness for roasted pigeons, the gamekeeper had already brought a dozen freshly hunted birds to the kitchen. Various cheeses were arranged upon platters. A barrel of sauerkraut and pickled cucumbers was opened. For dessert, the cooks baked a cranberry pie. To celebrate his daughter's return, Count Antoine hired musicians, and throughout the evening the sound of lutes filled the manor. After sunset, a great bonfire was lit in the courtyard and dancing began. Even Constance finally relaxed. She laughed as she joined the circle dances around the flames, her worries forgotten for a few precious hours. For the first time in years, Elvira slept deeply and peacefully. She stretched out upon a soft bed with the windows thrown open to the night air, so comfortable that she did not even hear the furious whining of mosquitoes outside. The familiar rhythm of life at the estate quickly drew her back into its embrace. Memories of the gray abbey began to fade from her mind. Constance often spent evenings reading novels aloud while Count Antoine sat nearby in a rocking chair, puffing thoughtfully on his pipe. For a time, it seemed that peace had finally found them both. Elvira asked for her horse to be saddled every morning and spent hours riding across the meadows and through the oak groves. Sometimes she took the hunting hounds with her. She remembered how, before being sent to the abbey, she used to run to the lake every morning. Hiding among the reeds, she would swim naked, scattering indignant ducks in every direction. "She's no proper young lady. She's a little rascal," the locals would laugh affectionately. Elvira never minded. Yet now that she had returned home, she could not bring herself to visit the lake. After her rides, she often went straight to her father's study and begged him to teach her how to manage the estate. Count Antoine was in no hurry to place such burdens upon his daughter's young shoulders. Like most fathers of his generation, he was far more concerned with finding her a suitable husband, a man worthy not only of her hand but also capable of managing the family's wealth and holdings. Elvira remained blissfully unaware of these plans. The subject had not yet been raised. Through sheer persistence, however, she managed to extract small lessons from her father and gradually learned the basics of administration. For now, that was enough. She knew very well that most young women were not permitted even this much. Complaining would have been ungrateful, so she simply enjoyed the freedom of youth and spent her days exactly as she pleased. As she began leaving Constance at home more frequently, she noticed something troubling. Her father seemed to be taking a particular interest in her friend. A faint suspicion crept into her mind. He had lived alone for many years, and now there was a young, gentle, agreeable girl living under his roof. Elvira grew alarmed. What if he falls in love with her? What if he decides to marry her? She paused. No, surely not. She has neither title nor family connections. More likely he would make her his mistress. The thought tormented her. Finally, one day she gathered her savings, bank drafts, and promissory notes, informed her father that she intended to visit her aunt, and set out for Toulouse with Constance at her side. The journey passed without incident. Mindful of the previous attack, Count Antoine had assigned an entire escort armed with muskets to accompany them. Aunt Catherine was a cheerful, plump woman who welcomed both girls with genuine warmth. Widowed for many years, she devoted herself to charitable works and breeding Persian cats. They roamed the house in furry armies, meowing, fighting, and causing endless mischief, much to their mistress's delight. She had never had children. After suffering a miscarriage in her youth, she was widowed before she could build the family she had dreamed of. Though neighbors repeatedly encouraged her to remarry and even introduced her to respectable widowers and bachelors, she refused every proposal without explanation. As a result, the girls were free to choose any room they wished in her spacious three-story mansion. One afternoon, Elvira suddenly announced, "Come, let's explore the city." Without waiting for a reply, she hooked her arm through Constance's and pulled her out the door. Pretending to stroll aimlessly, Elvira carefully studied the houses and shop signs they passed. At last she stopped before a charming little townhouse with a balcony. A sign hung beside the entrance, "For sale. Inquire at the Three Crusts Bakery, Hans Pascal." Elvira examined the building carefully. Then she nodded to herself. Without explanation, she turned and led Constance in search of the bakery. The Three Crusts turned out to be only a street away. The scent of fresh bread greeted them before they even reached the door. Elvira adored warm bread. Ever since childhood, she had been notorious for tearing off the crust from newly baked loaves and running outside with it while the cooks threw up their hands in despair. Now, indulging that old affection, she purchased a loaf of white bread. Breaking off a piece for herself and another for Constance, she chewed thoughtfully before addressing the stout baker in a flour-dusted cap. "Excuse me, sir," she said politely. "Would you happen to be the Pascal who is selling the house around the corner?" She pointed toward the street they had just come from. The baker frowned, gave Elvira a long, appraising look, and silently disappeared behind the counter. The girls exchanged puzzled glances. A minute later he returned, followed by a man with a narrow, elongated face and half-squinting eyes. "You were asking for me," the stranger said. "Hans Pascal. I'm the one selling the house. Are you interested in buying it?" "First, I'd like to see it." "Naturally," he replied, spreading his hands. He removed a ring of keys from the wall and motioned for them to follow. The ground floor contained a kitchen and a pantry, along with numerous cupboards for storing household goods and dishes. Upstairs were 2 bedrooms and a sitting room that opened onto a balcony, an ideal place, Elvira thought, to enjoy morning tea and fresh croissants. She rubbed her hands together with satisfaction and looked up at Pascal. And the price? The amount he named was lower than she had expected. For a moment she considered bargaining, if only for appearance's sake, but felt slightly ashamed of the idea. Instead, they went straight to a notary and completed the purchase. By evening, the deed was signed. Holding the cherished keys in her palm, Elvira stood beside Constance on the balcony, watching the sunset paint the rooftops of Toulouse in shades of gold and crimson. Below them, townsfolk strolled through the streets, unaware that the little house had found a new owner. At last, Constance gathered the courage to ask, "Why did you need such a modest little house?" Elvira leaned against the railing and glanced over the edge. Almost immediately, she recoiled. "Strange," she murmured. "I'm afraid of heights, and it's only the 2nd floor." Several minutes later, as they descended the staircase, she paused and looked up at her friend. "Anything can happen," she said. "Property never hurts to have. Let it stand here for now." There was no point asking further questions. Elvira had already revealed as much as she intended to. The girls remained in Toulouse for nearly a month, until the end of June. Then they decided to return home. Count Antoine had already written, asking them not to leave him alone for so long. Even Aunt Catherine's cats seemed to sense the approaching departure. They climbed onto the travel trunks and sprawled across them with an expression that clearly declared, "You shall not leave." When the time came to say goodbye, Elvira unexpectedly burst into tears. A deep sadness gripped her heart. A terrible thought flashed through her mind. I will never see her again. "Don't cry, my dear," Aunt Catherine soothed, embracing her warmly and brushing away the tears from her cheeks. "Toulouse is only a few leagues from your estate." Both women smiled, though neither truly believed it. For a brief moment they pretended they could visit one another every evening for supper. "And yet I hate leaving her," Elvira confessed later, wiping away another tear as the carriage rolled away. "Why does it feel like the last time?" "Because you visit her so rarely," Constance replied gently. "You're simply afraid it will be a long while before the next visit." But Elvira shook her head. Something inside her refused to be comforted, and she was not mistaken. Less than a month later, Aunt Catherine was gone. Her beloved cats were scattered among different households, and the cheerful mansion that had once echoed with their meows fell silent. 3. The Count warmly embraced his daughter, then glanced toward Constance and gave her a nod. She responded with a graceful curtsy and retired to her room. Elvira spent the afternoon unpacking the gifts she had brought back, brushing away stray cat hairs that clung to the wrapping. Laughing, she told stories about her aunt's house, where an entire army of cats roamed freely wherever they pleased. Because of the summer heat, she had not yet returned to horseback riding. Instead, she wandered through the shaded gardens, spread a carpet beneath the trees, and spent long hours reading novels in the cool shade. By July, the heat had become almost unbearable. One morning, Elvira awoke drenched in sweat. Even the night breeze that drifted through the open windows had brought little relief. A small bird with a violet breast hopped along the windowsill, pecking at crumbs of bread and dried cheese left from the previous day. "You little beauty," Elvira whispered, watching the tiny creature with delight, careful not to frighten it away. Suddenly, a crow swooped down from a nearby branch with a loud caw. Startled, the little bird spread its wings and vanished into the sky. "Oh, you dreadful thing!" Elvira sighed. She made no effort to chase the crow away. The bold bird merely strutted along the windowsill, proudly searching for the remaining crumbs. Stretching lazily, Elvira rose from bed and glanced at herself in the mirror. She admired her reflection for a moment before pulling the bell cord to summon a maid and request a bath. Two young servants arrived and began preparing the water, gathering soap and towels while exchanging excited whispers and bursts of laughter. Elvira listened. "We haven't seen anyone that handsome around here in years. And those velvet dark eyes. And those arms. Sometimes I wish I were one of the horses just so he'd brush me the way he brushes them." "You foolish girl." "Who are you talking about?" Elvira finally interrupted. The maids exchanged embarrassed looks, then remembered that their mistress treated them kindly and rarely stood on ceremony. "While you were visiting your aunt in Toulouse, a new stable hand arrived." "Oh, every girl in the county is hopelessly in love with him." "Is he really that handsome?" "A true Apollo." The girls eagerly described him. His strong hands, broad shoulders, handsome face, and especially his expressive dark brown eyes framed by thick lashes. As Elvira soaked in the bath, their descriptions painted the image of a powerful, heroic young man who seemed capable of taming even the wildest horse. Her curiosity grew stronger with every passing moment. Once dressed, she deliberately chose one of her simplest gowns and left her hair loose around her shoulders. On the way to the stable, she plucked a burgundy rose and tucked it behind her ear. Soon the stable came into view. The familiar scent of hay, horses, and fresh straw greeted her. The large doors stood open, and soft neighs echoed from within. Rather than enter immediately, Elvira peeked through the shutters, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious newcomer. She saw no one. Only the sound of splashing water reached her ears, accompanied by a low voice speaking gently to a horse. The animal answered with contented snorts. Unable to resist her curiosity any longer, she stepped inside. A piece of straw cracked beneath her shoe. The horses recognized her at once and greeted her with friendly nickers. Moving deeper into the stable, she approached the stall from which the voice came. There she saw him. A tall, dark-haired young man stood beside a bay stallion, one arm draped around its neck. Laughing softly, he whispered something into the horse's ear while the animal tossed its head with obvious affection. "Turn around already," Elvira muttered under her breath. "All I can see is your hair." But he continued stroking the stallion's neck. Finally, she stepped closer and asked with a teasing smile, "You seem to understand the language of horses." The unexpected voice made him turn sharply. For a moment, he simply stared. The maids had not exaggerated. Thick chestnut hair fell to his shoulders. Beneath dark brows shone striking eyes unlike any she had ever seen. His features seemed carved from marble, like those of an ancient statue. Broad shoulders and powerful arms hinted at years of hard work. Then he smiled. His white teeth flashed, and the expression transformed his entire face. "Are you new here?" he asked. "I don't think I've seen you before." Elvira nearly laughed. In her plain dress, he had mistaken her for a servant. "You could say that," she replied. "I imagine we'll be seeing each other often. I enjoy spending time in the stables." "Really?" he said with genuine enthusiasm. He handed her a brush and a cloth. "Then you can help." She accepted them and stepped beside the horse. "There was an injury here once," she said, tracing a faint scar on the animal's hind leg. "Yes," he replied. "I noticed. He told me he hurt it during a hunt." She stared at him. "He told you?" He shrugged. Perhaps. Sometimes it feels as though I can hear what horses think. You can understand animals? Only horses. Maybe you drank mare's milk as a child, she joked. His smile faded slightly. I wouldn't know. I'm an orphan. No one can tell me much about my childhood. An orphan, Elvira repeated softly. In a way, so am I, though my father is still alive. Then you're luckier than I am. Silence settled between them. Even the horse seemed to grow still. Elvira continued brushing the animal's coat. Suddenly, the stable hand gently took her hand and guided it in the opposite direction. Like this, he said quietly. He enjoys it more. His warm hand enclosed hers. A shiver ran through her. He noticed. Without realizing it, they had drifted closer together. Their breathing quickened. For one suspended moment, neither seemed capable of moving. Then Elvira pulled away abruptly. Here, she said, pressing the brush back into his hands. You're clearly the expert. Before he could answer, she slipped past him and hurried from the stable. As she fled toward the vineyard-covered gazebo hidden deep within the garden, her heart hammered wildly. What had just happened? Why had his touch affected her so deeply? And why had she felt for a fleeting instant that he might kiss her? The questions followed her all the way to her sanctuary among the vines. Yet no matter how hard she tried to dismiss the encounter, one thing remained impossible to ignore. She could not stop thinking about him. Later at dinner, she finally gathered the courage to ask her father, I heard you've hired a new stable hand. Does he take good care of my horses? The Count brightened immediately. Exceptionally well. A neighbor recommended him. His finest mare broke her leg and he was ready to put her down. This young man convinced him otherwise and nursed the animal back to health. She's stronger now than ever. And what is his name? The question sounded casual enough, though her pulse raced. The Count frowned thoughtfully. Ah, Henri. Yes, Henri Boyer. Henri Boyer, Elvira repeated quietly, lowering her eyes to her soup bowl. The conversation soon moved on to other matters, but Elvira barely heard a word. Only one thought remained in her mind. Henri Boyer,